Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling for another breakdown of our Dynasty Duels. This time we are looking at the 1987 Iowa State NCAA Championship team. It was the last time the Cyclones won a national team title. Best remembered for stopping Iowa's streak. They were going for 10 that year. Iowa State stopped it, won by 25 points over second place Iowa, 4 champions, 5 finalists, 6 All-Americans. But on its own, I think people remember it for stopping the streak, but this team deserves a lot of credit. This team was really good, and we have an NCAA champion from Iowa State. Stewart Carter won it at 158 pounds. How are you, Stewart?
I'm doing well. I'm here in the Quad Cities, enjoying some beautiful weather, and just excited today to talk about a little bit about wrestling. So all is well.
What went into that team? Were you guys aware of Iowa's streak of potentially 10, and was there talk about wanting to stop it?
So it's interesting. It's hard not to know because we wrestled Iowa twice that year in the dual meets, once in Iowa City and once in Ames. And so on their singlets, they had the Roman numeral 10 sewn on their singlets. And we knew, obviously everyone knew they had won 9 titles in a row, and we knew they were going for 10, but we weren't really obsessed with the 10 as much as they were, obviously, with having it on their singlets. So I think we weren't so much focused in on stopping Iowa as we were with just winning it ourselves. So I think our focus was more on that.
Let's take your individual story, because you were never even the starter until your senior year. And so Jesse Whitmer gets a lot of love for never being a starter and then winning it his senior. You were the same way. What took place during those first few years, and then why were you able to be so successful as a senior?
Well, I did start, believe it or not, as a true freshman. I started at Iowa State at 134 pounds. The year prior, Joe Gibbons was a true freshman All-American. I came to Iowa State not even thinking about wrestling, just thinking about school, and decided to go out. And because I knew the Gibbons family, I knew Joe. And so I decided to go out, and lo and behold, when Joe went down with a knee injury, I became the starter that year at 134. And then the next year I was the start. Then I redshirted, and then the third year I actually started and wrestled at 150 for about half the season. And then I hurt my knee, and then a guy by the name of Larry Jackson stepped in and did a good job and competed for the Cyclone. And then after that, unfortunately, I was at the same weight as Tim Krieger. And so I wrestled behind Tim Krieger. And so by the time I got back into the lineup was my senior year.
How'd you pull it off then? I mean, you had a great run. You were the 4 seed going into the tournament. Did you feel like you were ready to go there and pull it off?
Well, I think initially, the first part of the season, I thought I was, in my mind, I thought I was still a 150-pounder. And so I think I was a little bit intimidated, just committing to 158. But probably my natural body weight was around 172. So 158 was perfect. I think once I got more into the season and I got the matches in, and, we wrestled some tough kids from Oklahoma State and Michigan and other schools. And so early on, I had a couple losses, but they weren't. They were some losses to probably the top 3 rated guys in the country, and it was close, but I just couldn't pull them off. And I think based on who we had in the room and how I was competing against Kevin and Bill Tate and Larry and Tim Krieger, it gave me the confidence that, not only could I compete with those guys, but I could beat those guys. And I think something kicked in around the Christmas break, and my technique was getting better. I worked a lot with Coach Bannock on technique. I was getting stronger. My conditioning was good at that point. And it just kicked into gear. And next thing you know, I started winning and winning and winning, and that becomes contagious. And I got a chance to wrestle a guy who beat me earlier in the year in the Big 8 finals, Big 8 at that time, and beat him. And he was probably a 2 seed in the country. And I knew this was the opportunity. And so I think I wrestled and beat probably, if I had 4 losses, I beat 3 of those 4 guys on the second time around. And so I knew that was at least going to get me to the semis. And then from then, it's anybody's match.
Interesting season because the year before you guys had a good team. You had a guy named Kevin Jackson redshirted. I don't know if a lot of people know that he was a three-time All-American at Louisiana State. They dropped the program, then he transferred to Iowa State. But having KJ come in the lineup, what did he bring that was unique?
Well, I tell you what, the good thing with Kevin is we had around the same weight class, we had Mike Benarsdale, who was a two-time All-American at that point in time. What Kevin brought was he was just a beast. When I was a freshman, Nate Carr was the beast. And so when KJ came, it was another guy in the wrestling room that you could rally around and gain motivation from. And it was just good. It's just, there was a lot of good competition in the wrestling room. We knew Kevin was good. There was no doubt. I knew Kevin. I think we were both true freshmen wrestling when Iowa State wrestled LSU. So I met Kevin a couple years prior, but he was just a good guy, a good resource. He could help people to get better, and just stepped in, and just, we all admired him for his wrestling ability. It was just a good guy all around. So it put us in a very good position, whether it was going to be Kevin or Mike, that we were going to have a very good team that next year, and we did.
Did the three of you bang a lot in the wrestling room?
It's funny because, I was talking with some folks a while ago, the starters typically don't wrestle each other in practice. There's usually two or three other guys at a weight class that you really work out with. Kevin was a little bit bigger than me, so we sparred a little bit, but not a whole lot. I really didn't wrestle Krieger a whole lot. But when we did, I think there was not only the competition, but I think, you got guys who think they're the best at their weight class. So there's a lot of pride involved, and that pride can sometimes lead to injuries. So you had to separate the starters from each others to protect themselves. But we did go at it. A lot of great guys in the room besides the starters that really helped us. And so it was a fun time, a lot of good competition.
Jim Gibbons was in his second year as head coach, and Iowa State typically had diverse wrestling teams just across the board. When you think about that and you think back to this 87 Iowa State team, what was the flavor of the team? What did it feel like? What was the dynamic?
It was a very interesting team. You had Tim Krieger was from Mason City. Erik Volker was from Dallas Center Grimes. I was from Waterloo. So you had a mix of Iowa kids. Sometimes you don't see that much at the University of Iowa or Iowa State now, but we had a lot of folks on the team that were from the state of Iowa that kind of felt like we knew each other growing up. I remember Tim when Tim probably started wrestling 10 years prior to that, so knew the Krieger family. But then we also had some folks that transferred in. We had Bill Kelly, we had Perry Selmit, we had some folks that transferred in from junior college. And so it was just a mix of folks with experience, a mix of folks who grew up in the Iowa State wrestling program, who were from the state of Iowa. And then you had Kevin that came from LSU, but originally from Lansing, Michigan. And so it was good. It was people, not only the starters, but the folks in the wrestling room felt like a lot of Iowa folks, a lot of Iowa kids were there. And it felt like you knew them for more than just the time you knew them at Iowa State.
Who'd you hang out with the most?
It's interesting. Bill Tate, who was on the team year after, we grew up together. His dad was our coach growing up as kids. So Bill and I were roommates, obviously hung out with Bill. We had known each other since we were like 10. Roommates with KJ. The year we won it, Kevin and I were roommates, became good friends, are still good friends to this point. Hung out with folks like Larry Jackson, Gary McCall, even though he was a younger guy coming into the program. We took him under our wings and kind of helped transition him from high school wrestling to college wrestling. And then there was other folks that were there years prior. When I was a freshman, actually hung out with Nate Carr and Kevin Darkis quite a bit. And I think ultimately hanging out with those guys, Nate won 3 titles, Kevin won 1. It was like, I'm with guys who can win it and who've won it and are very talented, but outside of wrestling, they're just normal people with all the same normal quirks. And I think being around them helped me to realize that if you really work hard and you believe in the program, you can win it too. It took me a little bit longer than those guys, but I think it was early on hanging out with those guys. I went to high school. I was a teammate of Joe Gibbons, good friend back then, good friend to this day. So all of that, like I said earlier, it becomes contagious. And so a lot of good folks that we spent time with and grew up with.
Erik Volker is an interesting story because I've always felt like he overachieved, like he really maximized his complete talent and then some. Gets first as a sophomore in '87, third, and then wins it again. But did he bring something extra to the room? Could you tell he was working at a different level?
You know, it's interesting because Erik had a similar background to me. I wrestled in high school in Iowa, went to Waterloo Columbus, had made it to the state tournament all 4 years of high school, but never won a title. Got close a couple years, a couple thirds and a second my senior year. And so Erik came in there being maybe his best finish was a runner-up. So I think Erik was a lot like me, where there was still more in the tank and there was still this level of development. But I tell you what, you know, even though he was a younger guy, when I was a senior, he was a sophomore, he was just a bull. You know, he had good mat presence. He had good skills on his feet. And, you know, this isn't to say anything about Erik, but it was like he was beating people. And then I was thinking, wow, this 190-pound weight class, these guys aren't really good because Erik's just beating them. And the thing was, he just kept beating them and beating them and beating them. And it was like, where did this guy come from? But he was just a guy who was still waiting to develop. And it was just exciting to be around him. He just a genuinely good guy, really kind of quiet, but just would quietly get things done and just really impressed by him, you know. And then what he did afterwards, the next 2 years, just incredible.
The championships that year were in College Park, Maryland, and I have to think there was just a buzz around it that there was a lot of good teams that year. Penn State was in there, Oklahoma State. You guys actually tied. Oklahoma State and Iowa State tied at the Big 8 tournament. So do you remember the tournament specifically and what the buzz was going in that year?
You know, I think you're spot on, Kyle. I think that year there were probably 5 teams. Obviously, Iowa State, but you mentioned Oklahoma State and Penn State that really had a shot. It just really depended on what individuals were going to do. What you'll find with wrestling, there's teams that are really good in dual meets, and then there's really good tournament teams. I knew we were okay in dual meets. We probably only lost 2 or 3, but I knew we had the firepower to do really good in tournaments. And so, but I knew the other teams were good in tournaments. You had Oklahoma State, you had John Smith, you had Iowa, you had Algiers and a host of other folks in Heffernan. And so it was just who was going to show up. And I think we were peaking at the right time, but so were the other teams. And it was just who was going to show up. And round by round, we lost some close ones with some of the guys like Perry Summit and Steve, but the guys who you expected to do well, like Kevin, like Krieger and Volker, just stepped up. And before you knew it, we had 5 guys in the finals. And I think there wasn't anyone in the finals where it was a surprise. And then the question was, how are we going to match up against Iowa? Because Iowa was still number 2 going into the last day. How were we going to match up, and were we going to get those 1 or 2 victories to seal it all? And we did it when Bill Kelly spladled Penrith. So just an exciting time. And I don't know if it was so exciting because the fans were just behind us, because for the first time in 10 years, it was somebody besides Iowa.
Well, take that. So are you proud that you beat Iowa in '87? Does that feel good that you took down Iowa?
Oh, yeah, definitely, because of the history. You know, Gable is an Iowa Stater. It had been a long time for Iowa State. It had been 10 years. We were ready. We were due. Somebody had to do it, and it was going to be stopping Iowa. And it was exciting to be the team that did it, and just was hoping that it was the beginning of more titles for Iowa State. I thought they had a good chance in '88 in Ames to win it. And then Erik got beat, Tim got beat. So Bernard still won his title then. So it was kind of sad that they didn't win it then or the next year. And I think as exciting as it was for us to win it all. It was kind of sad that that didn't get the traction and momentum for them to win the second and third, potentially in a row.
Or I'm not going to ask you about your matchup against Penn State because anyone's always going to say, I think I could win no matter what. So I'm going to ask you about someone else. The matchup, if you look at the 10, the one that's the most intriguing is at 174 pounds. You have two-time junior world champion, NCAA champion, and Mark Hall going against future three-time world and Olympic champion and your teammate, Kevin Jackson. How do you see that match going?
That's interesting. I've been watching on Track Wrestling the Dynasty matchup, and I don't know if we got a great draw or not, but Mark Hall, gotta say that guy is incredible. I saw him wrestle in the Olympic trials. I've seen him wrestle in college. It was unfortunate he didn't get an opportunity to win a title this year, but I saw KJ through college. I saw Kevin win a world title, Olympic title. His body of work says if those two had to match up, Kevin was going to win. And I'd say it'd be a close match, but I'd have to go with my man KJ.
What do people want to talk about? I mean, this team is still relevant. Like this 87 team, people still talk about it. Do you feel that vibe? Do you get the feeling that people still want to talk about this great team?
I think they do, and unfortunately, I think the couple biggest things are, number one, we stopped Iowa from winning 10. And it's funny, I saw a documentary, and then Gable was talking about he doesn't even understand why they sold 10 on the singlets. He thought that was a bad idea. So I think stopping Iowa from winning 10 is obviously what we're known for. That was the first time in 10 years Iowa State had won. And unfortunately, that was the last time Iowa State has won, and it's approaching 30 plus years now. So I think stopping Iowa, having won it 10 years after the 77 team won it with folks like Mike Land, and now it's been 35 years since we won it. So I can't wait for Coach Dresser to continue to turn the program around, and so we don't make it into year 40, and that's the last time they won. So great guys on that team. We had 5 in the finals. We walked away with 4 titles. 2 of the guys ended up winning titles later on. Kevin went on to go have a great international career, eventually becoming the coach at Iowa State. So just a lot of good folks on that team, and just excited to be a part of that. It's my legacy. It helped me to make up for not winning the state title in Iowa, and it also created an outlet to meet some great friends that have been friends since my time at Iowa State and to this present.
I see you have that Erik Carter electric back there. That's pretty cool because, as you mentioned, you're from Waterloo, so is Dan Gable. A lot of great NCAA champions are from Waterloo. It's just an incredible legacy. But were you aware of Gable when you were growing up in Waterloo?
Oh, yeah. I started wrestling at the boys club probably in the mid-'70s. And once I got into wrestling and really understood what it was like, oh my God, one of the best ever is from Waterloo. So I knew of Dan Gable and knew of his legacy. And so my thought was, if I want to wrestle, I want to be good. I never thought to get to a level of Gable or to be wrestling against teams that Gable was coaching, but it was really quite the honor to be associated with him. My intent was to go to West High and to wrestle, and I decided to jump ship and go to Columbus as a freshman. But, part of going to West High was I could wrestle on the same team that Gable wrestled on. And then later on going to Iowa State, and Gable was an Iowa Stater, it was great to be a part of that, and definitely knew who Dan was, definitely got opportunities to meet with him and talk with him throughout high school and college, and just a great ambassador for the sport of wrestling.
Although he wasn't part of the 87 team, the most recent individual NCAA champion for Iowa State was Kevin Gadson, and Willie Gadson coached at Waterloo East. He's passed. Did you know him very well, and what do you remember about him?
So I didn't know, and kudos to Kevin for winning the title and representing Waterloo. I didn't know Coach Gadson. I knew Coach Gadson, but met him later on. He was gone when I got to Iowa State, but I knew his brother, Charlie Gadson, because Charlie was still in the wrestling room. And Charlie was a person we all looked up to and respected, not only for his wrestling ability, but his overall size was very intimidating. So I've known the Gadson family for a while, but it was early on through Charlie Gadson. And then obviously Willie being the coach at the high school, and when Willie was in the Iowa City area, and knew Kyvan growing up. And so just nice to be associated with the Gadson family. And I still reach out to Kyvan, making sure things are going well for him. And, because it's tough, with the experiences that he had with his dad passing. But he's a fine young man, and he'll continue to do well, both on and off the mat. So just kudos to the Gadson family.
Thanks for sharing these memories. This is fun to see how this matchup will go, but certainly an iconic team, and you were a big part of that. But thanks for breaking this down, and we do wish you all the best as we try to dig out of this coronavirus.
Yeah, well, two things. Number one, Kyle, awesome to have the opportunity to talk about the 87 team and some of the teammates. And it's wrestling is really been very impactful in my life. And so just excited to be asked about the 87 team, excited to be able to provide support through the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, and just would say everybody to be safe, make sure you're practicing social distancing and you're sheltering in place so we can get through this, so we can get the Olympics going again in 2021. So thank you for the time, and hopefully some of this has been insightful to you and the viewers.
It sure has. I appreciate it. This is a lot of fun, and I know we'll catch up again soon.
All right. You take care. Thank you.